My name is Brittany Duell, and I'm 30 years old. At my cousin's wedding last Saturday, in front of 80 guests, my mother stood up at the head table after the cake had been cut and said, loud enough that the band stopped playing, "Divorce him, Brittany. If you won't take Wesley back, don't call me your mother." My husband was sitting next to me. His name is Royce. He had just put down his fork. He looked at my mother the way a kind man looks at a person he has been trying very hard to be patient with. My father, on the other side of the table, slowly nodded along with my mother, the way he had been nodding along with my mother for 40 years. And 6 feet behind my mother, holding a glass of champagne my mother had handed him before her toast, my ex-husband Wesley was smiling, not loudly, not in a way most of the guests would have noticed. But I saw it, the small private smirk of a man who had spent 5 years rebuilding my parents into a weapon and was watching the weapon finally fire. He had been invited by my mother. He was at the table. He was, in every way that mattered to her, family. I was the one who had been demoted. I did not argue. I did not cry. I had stopped doing both of those things with my mother around the time I turned 26. I reached down to my bag, the small evening bag I had carried into the reception, and took out a manila folder, 3/4 of an inch thick, tabbed, organized, indexed. I had been building it since February. I had photocopied the most important pages 3 times each, because by then I had learned that proof has a way of disappearing when the wrong person decides it is inconvenient. I'd brought it to the wedding the way some women bring a hairbrush, quietly, without expecting to need it but ready in case. And I had carried it past the flower arch, through the ceremony, and into a room where I had hoped not to use it. I opened it to page 1. It was a court record. It named Wesley. It dated from years before I knew him, and it described a version of him that my mother had spent 5 years insisting could not possibly exist. I placed the folder in front of her and turned the page right side up in the cake and champagne light. My mother covered her mouth. My father fell back in his chair so hard its legs scraped the dance floor. Across the table, Wesley did not speak. His face changed by degrees. First irritation, then calculation, and finally something colder. Recognition. The band had not started playing again. It would not start for the rest of the night. Before I tell you what was on page 1, understand this. My mother had not made that toast on impulse. She had been pushed toward it for months, maybe years, by a man who understood exactly where her fears lived and how to make them speak for him. If you have ever watched someone use the word family as a threat, you know how quickly a room can become unsafe. Like and subscribe if stories like this are the reason you listen. And tell me in the comments, what is the sentence someone in your family said that you still cannot forget? I am Brittany. This is the story of an ex-husband who did not try to drag me back after I left him. He did something more patient. He made himself indispensable to my parents, convinced them my new husband was beneath me, and waited for them to deliver the ultimatum he could not make himself. To understand why that folder existed, you have to understand the marriage. And to understand the marriage, you have to understand Wesley. I met Wesley Galloway when I was 21 years old, in the last semester of college, at a bar near campus that I should never have been in. He was 24, 3 years out of school, already working at a financial advisory firm in Charlotte. He was good-looking, well-dressed, smooth in the way a certain kind of young man learns to be, when he has figured out early what gets him what he wants. He had a steady voice. He had a clean apartment. He had, even at 24, the appearance of being a fully assembled adult, and to a 21-year-old senior who was about to graduate into a hard job market and was looking for some kind of ground to stand on, that appearance was the most attractive thing about him. We started dating that February. We were engaged by Christmas. We were married in the May after my graduation. The whole thing took 15 months, start to finish. My parents loved him. My mother loved him in particular. She had spent my childhood worrying. In a way, she would never directly say that I would end up with someone who didn't have any money. And Wesley was the answer to that worry. He had a job in finance. He talked about retirement planning. He drove a leased BMW. He brought my mother flowers when he came over for dinner. He treated my father like a senior partner whose opinion he needed to hear before making any decision. He was in every way that my parents cared about the right shape of son-in-law. I want you to know that I, too, was happy in the beginning. The first year of marriage was not a nightmare. The nightmare did not announce itself. It crept. That is the thing about people like Wesley. They don't show you who they are on day 1. They show you who they are on day 300. And by then you have built half your life around the version they showed you on day 1. And you cannot tell anymore which version is real. The first thing he did, looking back, was correct me. Small things. The way I held a wine glass at a dinner party. The way I told a story. The way I dressed for one of his work events. He would say it kindly. He would say it the first time as a suggestion, the second time as an observation, the third time as a sigh. By the time we had been married 6 months, I had absorbed 100 small corrections about how to be the kind of wife he needed me to be, at the kind of events his career required. And I had begun, without quite noticing it, to consult him before I spoke at his work functions. The second thing he did was rewrite my memory. This is the one I want you to understand, because it is the engine of everything that came later. Wesley would say something to me, a casual cruelty, a sharp comment in private. And the next day, when I brought it up, he would tell me, calmly, and with what looked like real concern, that he had never said any such thing. "Brit, sweetheart, I would never say that. You must have dreamed it." And the first 3 times this happened, I believed him. I thought maybe I did imagine it. I was tired. By the 10th time, I had started writing things down in a small notebook I kept in my underwear drawer. Not because I had figured out what was happening, but because I needed proof to myself that I was not, as Wesley kept gently implying, losing my mind. I still have that notebook. 9 years later, it is the first record I reach for whenever someone asks why I left. The 3rd year of the marriage was when it stopped being subtle. He started monitoring my phone. He had set up the family iCloud, and somehow, by the 2nd year, he had access to my location at all times. He would text me casually about where I'd been. "Saw you stopped at the coffee shop on Tryon today. Who were you meeting?" And I would feel the small, sick lurch of realizing that he had been watching the dot of me move across the city while he was at his desk. When I tried to remove him from the location sharing, he sat me down and gave me a long, patient explanation about how married couples shouldn't need to hide where they were, and how the fact that I wanted to hide was very troubling, and was there something going on I needed to tell him about. He started cutting me off from people. My best friend from college, Pam. He decided Pam was a bad influence. Pam was a lesbian, was the issue. Wesley had decided, with the certainty of a man whose certainties were the world, that Pam was secretly trying to turn me against the marriage. He didn't forbid me to see her. He just made every interaction with her cost something, a sulk, a fight, a long cold weekend, until I had quietly stopped seeing her, because the price of seeing her had become higher than I could afford. I lost Pam for 2 years that way. I have her back now. She came to my wedding to Royce. But for 2 years of my 20s, Wesley took her by inches, and I did not even fully understand he had taken her until she was gone, and he was building a version of me for other people. I did not know it while we were married. Years later, after I had left, I found messages he had sent to his mother and sister. In them, he described me as unstable, paranoid, too fragile to be trusted with my own choices. He wrote that I was making things up. He wrote that I needed to be cared for, not given more freedom. He had been preparing an audience for the story he wanted to tell after I was gone. I read those messages alone in my studio apartment, sitting on the floor with my back against a wall. I had escaped him, but he had spent 3 years laying track into every relationship around us. That was the first time I understood the difference between a cruel man and a strategic one. Cruelty hurts you in private. Strategy makes sure no one believes you when you explain the hurt. And once people have been trained to see you as unstable, every truth you tell sounds, to them, like another symptom. I did not know yet how far Wesley had taken that strategy. I only knew that he had not let go of the story of me. He had been saving it, polishing it, waiting for the right people to hear it. I left Wesley in October of 2020. I was 25. The leaving was not dramatic. I want to say that because I think people imagine these things as dramatic. And the reality, for most of us, is quieter. I had been seeing a therapist for 6 months by that point, secretly paid for in cash so it would not show on the joint credit card statements Wesley reviewed every Sunday. The therapist was the first person in 3 years who had heard the full inventory of what was happening in my house and named it. Brittany, this is emotional abuse. It is a textbook case. You are not imagining anything. You are not crazy. You are being systematically controlled. I had cried for 40 minutes in her office. She had given me a card for a women's shelter and a card for a local family law attorney. She had told me to leave when I was ready and to take everything I would need and to assume I would not be allowed back into the house. I planned the leaving for a month. I copied the documents I would need, financial statements, the deed, my passport, the notebook from my underwear drawer, the backup of the shared drive. I rented a small studio in a different part of Charlotte under a friend's name. I waited for a weekend Wesley was traveling for work, and I packed 2 suitcases, and I drove out of the marital house with one of those Sunday morning quiet feelings of a person who has finally, after years of preparing, just done the thing. Wesley did not let me leave quietly. He couldn't. Men like Wesley don't. For the first month, he called me 40 times a day. He left voicemails that ran the full spectrum: pleading, angry, threatening, weeping, sometimes all four in the same message. He showed up at my office twice. He sent flowers. He sent legal threats. He told my parents, then my coworkers, then anyone who would listen that I'd had a breakdown, that I was not in my right mind, that I needed to be brought home. And then, in the week before I filed for the divorce, when he finally understood, I think, that I was not coming back, he left one specific voicemail. I have it. It is page 64. The audio file is saved to a cloud account I have access to from any device. His voice on the voicemail is very calm. He says, "Brittany, I'm going to say this once. You don't get to do this to me. You can leave, you can have your divorce, but I want you to know for the rest of your life that you will not be at peace. You will not have a marriage that lasts. You will not have a family that picks you. I will make sure of it. I'm not going to do anything you can call the police about. I'm just going to be patient. I have a long time. You'll see what I mean." I saved the voicemail because my attorney told me to. When I played the voicemail for my attorney, she told me to save it in more than one place and to take the threat seriously, even if he never followed through. She said I did not need to predict his next move. I only needed to stop assuming he was finished with me. She told me that separation did not always end a controlling person's need for control. Sometimes it only changed the route they used to reach you. She was right about that. Wesley was not finished. He was, as he had said in the voicemail, patient. If you have ever left someone and mistaken the silence afterward for safety, you will understand why I missed what was happening next. I thought the voicemail was the last dramatic thing Wesley would ever say to me. I thought leaving had removed me from the reach of his anger. For a while, it even looked that way. I was rebuilding my life. He was no longer at my door. I was wrong about one thing. Wesley was never planning to come at me directly. He was going to make my parents do it for him. My parents were not monsters. That is what made Wesley's work on them so effective. My mother, Danette Duell, was 58, and she had spent most of her adult life translating fear into judgment. She grew up in a working-class family in eastern North Carolina, married my father at 19, and never quite stopped expecting comfort to disappear. By the time I was grown, money was not just money to her. It was character. A man with a clean car, a confident voice, and a retirement plan was responsible. A man with an ordinary salary, uncertain prospects, or no interest in impressing people was a risk. Wesley understood that instinct before I did. He did not need to make my mother love him. He only needed to keep showing her the version of safety she had been trained to trust. My father, Cyrus Duell, was 61. He had run a small contracting business for 30 years, paid his bills, fixed what broke, and spent 4 decades treating agreement with my mother as the price of peace. He was not cruel. He was worse in the specific way passive people can be worse. When someone stronger decided who was right, he made silence look like loyalty. Wesley noticed that too. My mother was the door. My father was the lock that never turned. When I left Wesley, neither of them believed what I was saying about him. They did not call him abusive. They called me overwhelmed. They did not ask for the notebook or listen to the voicemail. They told relatives I was having a hard time, sent Wesley flowers, invited him to Thanksgiving, and urged me to consider what I was throwing away. They did all of it in the language of concern. That was how Wesley got inside, not by asking my parents to betray me, but by giving them a version of events that made betrayal feel responsible. At that point, I had two choices. I could force the evidence into my parents' hands. The notebook, the messages, the voicemail, every private fact Wesley had taught me to preserve. Or I could step back and let them decide what kind of relationship they wanted with their daughter. I chose distance, not because I thought Wesley deserved it, because I knew my mother. If I arrived with proof while she was still invested in believing him, she would not hear a warning. She would hear an accusation against the man she had chosen to defend. My father would nod because she had decided first. I told myself that adults eventually see what is in front of them. I told myself time would make Wesley's performance harder to maintain. For a while, giving them space felt like the least destructive choice. I was 26, then 27. I was rebuilding a life in Charlotte, trying to sleep through the night, trying to learn what normal disagreement sounded like, trying to believe that leaving a bad marriage counted as enough of a victory. I could not spend every week litigating my own past at my parents' kitchen table. What I did not understand was that silence does not remain empty when a manipulative person has access to it. While I was giving my parents room to come to the truth, Wesley was filling that room with attention, advice, gratitude, and a story about me they were already prepared to believe. It began about 6 months after the divorce was final. My parents mentioned, almost casually, that Wesley had taken them to lunch. He had been checking in. He was worried about them. He had stayed for 2 hours, and my mother said they had really enjoyed it. I told myself lunch was lunch. A year later, he was looking over their retirement statements. Nothing official, my parents said. Just free advice from a man who knew finance. My mother talked about him with the pleased surprise of someone who believed kindness had arrived at her door without a price. Wesley was generous with his time. Wesley explained things the bank never explained. Wesley was like a son. That phrase should have frightened me more than it did. By the 3rd year, he had moved from their kitchen table into their finances. My mother told me he had helped them place part of their retirement money into an investment program connected to his firm. Only a portion, she said, about $100,000. He was getting them better returns than the bank. She said it proudly, as though my ex-husband's access to their future was proof that I had misjudged him. I asked if I could see the paperwork. My mother's face changed before she answered. She said I was being paranoid. She said Wesley was family and I needed to stop punishing him for a divorce he had accepted more gracefully than I had. She said he had grown. She said my refusal to let him back into my life was hurting everyone else. My father said nothing. I remember him looking at the table while she spoke, as though the grain of the wood required his full attention. That was the first time I understood the scale of what Wesley had built. He did not need my parents to agree that he had hurt me. He only needed them to believe that my refusal to forgive him was evidence that I was still unstable. Once they believed that, every boundary I set became another reason to trust him more. I need you to understand what my mother was dismissing when she said that. Royce teaches American history because he believes teenagers deserve at least one adult who expects them to become more than the version of themselves they arrived at school believing. On our second date over bad Thai food, he told me about his ninth grade history teacher, the first adult who had ever spoken to him as though his questions were worth answering. He said he became a teacher because he wanted to be that person for somebody else's child. He said it quietly, without presenting it as sacrifice or virtue. It was simply the clearest thing he knew about himself. 5 years later, my mother took that life and reduced it to a salary estimate and a one-story house. She used the words Plan B, as though a man who spent his days making children less ignorant was something I had settled for. What she meant was simpler and uglier. Royce did not make her feel financially protected, so she had decided he could not possibly make me safe. I held my wine glass so tightly I could feel my pulse against the stem. Across the table, Royce had stopped eating. He was watching my face. He could hear my mother speaking, but not every word. He knew enough to understand that somebody on the other end had found a way to make me small again. The Valentine's Day call came in February of this year. Royce had cooked dinner. He had made my favorite, a slow-cooked chicken thing his grandmother had taught him, and we were eating it at the small dining table in our small house with candles, like real adults trying to have a real Valentine's. We had been married a little over a year. He had reached across the table to top up my wine, and I had laughed at something he said about a kid in his 5th period class. And the phone rang. It was my mother. I had not heard from her in 3 weeks. I picked up. My mother said, "Brittany, I've been talking to your father. We have to say this. We can't watch this anymore." I said, "Mom, I'm in the middle of dinner." "Listen to me," she said. Her voice was the voice she used to use to deliver verdicts when I was a teenager. "We have been thinking about you and Royce, about this marriage you've gotten yourself into. Brittany, sweetheart, he's a teacher. He makes, what, $55,000? 60? You're going to die in a one-story house with him. You're going to have no money for retirement. You're going to be the wife of a man who couldn't make anything of himself." "Wesley, stop saying his name," I said. "Wesley has built a business. Wesley has a future. Wesley has been waiting for you to come back to your senses, and your father and I think you owe him at least a conversation. He's been so patient. He has been so good to us. He still loves you, Brittany. He still asks about you. And you are out here throwing your life away on a man whose entire career consists of teaching high school children about the Revolutionary War. I need you to understand what my mother was dismissing when she said that. Royce teaches American history because he believes teenagers deserve at least one adult who expects them to become more than the version of themselves they arrived at school believing. On our second date over bad Thai food, he told me about his ninth grade history teacher, the first adult who had ever spoken to him as though his questions were worth answering. He said he became a teacher because he wanted to be that person for somebody else's child. He said it quietly, without presenting it as sacrifice or virtue. It was simply the clearest thing he knew about himself. 5 years later, my mother took that life and reduced it to a salary estimate and a one-story house. She used the words Plan B, as though a man who spent his days making children less ignorant was something I had settled for. What she meant was simpler and uglier. Royce did not make her feel financially protected, so she had decided he could not possibly make me safe. I was holding the wine glass so tightly I could feel my pulse in my hand. Royce, across the table, was watching me. He had stopped eating. He had set down his fork. He was watching my face the way a husband watches his wife when he knows something bad is happening to her on the phone, but he doesn't know yet what it is. My mother kept talking. She said, "Royce is a plan B, Brittany. You and I both know it. You are using him to prove to me that I was wrong about Wesley. You are using a perfectly decent man as a weapon against your own mother. And I am telling you tonight, on Valentine's Day, that I am not going to participate anymore. You have until your cousin's wedding to come to your senses. You divorce Royce. You give Wesley a chance to talk to you. You come back to the family the way you should have 5 years ago. Or you don't, and you find out what it means to not have a mother." I did not say anything. I could not say anything. My mouth was not, in that moment, attached to my throat. She said, "I'm hanging up. Talk to your father. He agrees with everything I just said." She hung up. I sat at the table with the phone in my hand and looked at Royce. He had heard only one side of the call. He knew it was my mother. He did not know she had told me to divorce him, or that she had called him a plan B, or that she had given me a deadline to return to Wesley. For 1 second, I almost told him everything. Then I put the phone down and said, "Everything's okay. Just my mom being my mom." Royce did not challenge the lie. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Britt," he said, "you don't have to tell me. Whatever it was, you don't have to." That was the difference between Royce and Wesley. Wesley treated private pain as a door he was entitled to force open. Royce treated it as a room I could leave when I was ready. He did not make me explain myself while I was still trying to understand what had happened. He finished the dinner he had cooked. He poured me more wine. He sat beside me without asking whether I was going to call my father back. Later that night, after he was asleep, I sat alone in my home office and wrote down every sentence my mother had said. Not because I needed to remember it, I knew I would remember it. I wrote it down because, for the first time, I understood that my mother was no longer merely refusing to see the truth about Wesley. She was helping him act on it. I did not decide to win an argument with her. I decided I would never again arrive in a room with them empty-handed. When I heard my mother reduce the love of my life to a sentence, "He's a plan B, he's a teacher, he's beneath you," I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My mother was not going to wake up one morning and suddenly see Wesley clearly. Not while he was still useful to her. Not while he was still telling her she had been right about him and wrong about me. So I stopped preparing to explain myself. I started preparing to prove what he had done. For 5 months, I worked quietly. Not because I wanted revenge, because I had spent too many years walking into rooms with people who had already been given a version of me that made every truth sound like an excuse. The first part of what I needed was already in my house. I gathered the notebook I had kept during the marriage, the saved messages, the voicemail, the backup files, the dates and records I had preserved because Wesley had trained me to doubt my own memory. I did not read every page again. I could not. I sorted them. I labeled them. I made copies. On a long February weekend, while Royce was at a school event, I sat in my home office with coffee going cold beside me and built the spine of the folder. But a record of what Wesley had done to me was not enough. My parents had spent 5 years treating my experience as a private disagreement between ex-spouses. I needed something that existed outside my memory, outside their opinion, outside any story Wesley could call bitterness. So I went looking for the woman who had known him before I did. And I looked harder at the one place he had made himself impossible for my parents to question: their money. I drove to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse on a Thursday afternoon in March and told my boss I had a doctor's appointment. At a public records terminal, I searched Wesley Galloway's name. It took less than 15 minutes. 7 years earlier, 2 years before I met him, a woman named Vienna Patrick had been granted a domestic violence protective order against Wesley. The court record described harassment, stalking, and intimidation after their relationship ended. It was not sealed. It was public because she had chosen not to let it disappear. I read the order twice. The language was formal and restrained, which somehow made it worse. It did not call him a monster. It listed dates, contacts, incidents, and the exact boundaries another woman had needed a judge to impose. Then I printed it, paid the copy fee, and drove home with the pages in a brown envelope on the passenger seat. I kept thinking about Vienna, a woman I had never met who had left a warning in a courthouse database long before I knew I would need it. That order became page 1, not because it was the most painful document I had. The notebook was more painful. The voicemail was more personal. But page 1 proved the thing my parents had refused to understand. Wesley had not become this way because of me, or because our marriage failed, or because I had supposedly pushed him too far. He had a pattern. I had stepped into it after someone else had already escaped it. The last part was harder. I needed to understand what Wesley was doing with my parents' money. I did not have access to their accounts, and I could not demand it without confirming every accusation my mother had already accepted about me. But I worked in financial services. I knew how advisory statements were supposed to read, what disclosed fees looked like, and which details people ignored when the first page showed a reassuring return. I also knew enough not to accuse someone of misconduct based on a feeling, a bad relationship, or one charge I did not understand. In April, I called my mother and told her I was thinking about my own retirement planning. I said I remembered Wesley mentioning the investment program connected to his firm and asked whether she would send me the statements he had been giving them. I framed it as curiosity. She heard it as something else. She heard it as me coming around. She emailed the statements within an hour. 3 years of quarterly reports, neatly saved with a note that said, "You'll see why we trust him." I read them alone at my desk on a Saturday afternoon while Royce graded papers at a coffee shop. At first, nothing looked dramatic. The returns were real. The account had grown. Every number on the first page was exactly the kind of number Wesley would have wanted my mother to see. Then I turned to the fee disclosures. I checked the advisory charge against the rate his firm publicly listed. I checked the extra consulting line against the product description. I checked the transaction history, then the administrative charges, then the dates they appeared. The pattern was small enough to hide inside normal-looking paperwork and regular enough that it could not be accidental. By the end of 2 hours, I had built a table of every questionable charge, every date, and every difference between what the document said he could charge and what he appeared to have charged. I knew Wesley had not simply made himself trusted by my parents. He had made their trust profitable. I printed every statement. I highlighted nothing at first. I made myself write a clean, neutral summary of what the documents showed, the way I would have written it for someone who did not know any of us. Then I read it again and made copies. The amount was large enough to matter. The structure was clear enough that once my father saw it, Wesley would not be able to explain it away with charm, concern, or another speech about how much he had helped them. I assembled the folder in the order that made the truth hardest to escape. First, the court order, proof that Wesley's behavior had a history. Then my records from the marriage, proof that he had done the same kind of damage to me. Last, the statements from my parents' account, proof that while they defended him, he had been using their trust for his own benefit. By the end of May, it was complete. I did not send it to my parents. I did not confront Wesley. I did not warn either of them that I knew more than they thought I knew. I put the folder in my desk drawer and let it sit there through June. By late July, when my cousin Brielle's wedding arrived, it had been waiting for 6 weeks. So had I. For 6 weeks, I carried it to work only once, checked the copies twice, and kept telling myself I would use it only if they forced the moment. I was still hoping they would not. Ewan. The wedding was at a converted barn venue outside Charlotte. 80 guests. A nice late July evening, warm but not unbearable. The kind of sunset that makes outdoor weddings work. My cousin Brielle was 26 and radiant. Her new husband, a soft-spoken civil engineer named Tobias, was the kind of guy you could tell, just by looking at him, was going to be a good husband for the next 60 years. I had been at Brielle's bridal shower the month before. I had given her a serving platter. I had been planning to enjoy the wedding. My mother had other plans. My mother had invited Wesley. He had RSVP'd. He had shown up in a charcoal suit that I recognized. I had picked it out for him when we had been married. And he had walked into the reception with my mother on his arm, the way a beloved son-in-law walks into a family wedding. My Aunt Bonnie greeted him by name. My cousins had been told to be polite. Brielle, who had agreed to seat him at my mother's table because my mother had begged, had given me a brief, apologetic look when she saw me come in. I had squeezed her hand. I had told her it was fine. I had walked to my own assigned seat at a table 2 away from my mother's, with Royce beside me. Royce, all evening, had been the version of himself he became at hard family events. Steady, present, almost invisible in the best way. He had not commented when he saw Wesley walk in. He had simply taken my hand briefly under the table during the ceremony and squeezed it once and then let go. The trouble started at the head table after dinner. My mother had asked to give what she called a small toast. She was not the mother of the bride. She had no official role in the evening. But the DJ handed her a microphone anyway because my mother had spent her life speaking with the confidence of someone who expected rooms to arrange themselves around her. I should have known what was coming when she looked past Brielle and Tobias and found me at my table. "I just want to say something to my daughter Brittany," she said. "Brittany, I love you. You know I love you. But this family has been broken for 5 years, and I have decided I'm not going to be quiet about it anymore." The room changed before she finished the sentence. The band stopped. Brielle's face went still. Royce's hand came to the back of my chair. My mother lifted the microphone closer to her mouth. "Divorce him, Brittany. If you will not take Wesley back, do not call me your mother. I mean it. Wesley is family. He has been more of a son to your father and me than you have been a daughter, and we are tired of pretending." 80 people heard her say it. My father nodded from 3 seats away. Not quickly, not reluctantly. The same slow nod he had used for 40 years whenever my mother decided what was true. Wesley was standing 6 feet behind her, with a champagne glass in his hand. He had the expression of a man trying very hard not to look pleased. That was how I knew he had expected it. Maybe he had written the words for her. Maybe he had only spent 5 years teaching her which words would hurt me most. It did not matter. The result was the same. I stood. I did not look at Wesley. I picked up my evening bag and walked toward the head table. Royce rose with me, but did not follow. He knew I needed to cross that room alone. Behind me, I could hear chairs shift and someone whisper Brielle's name. I stopped in front of my mother. "Mom," I said, "put the microphone down." She did not, so I opened my bag, took out the folder, and laid it on the table between us. I opened it to page 1. It was a court record, dated years before I met Wesley. I turned it toward her. "Read that," I said. My mother looked down, her face emptied. My father leaned forward. Wesley took 1 step toward the table, then stopped. For the first time all night, he looked afraid. I want to tell you what I said next, because I had been writing versions of it in my head for 5 months. But when I looked at my mother holding that microphone and Wesley standing behind her, I did not need the version I had rehearsed. I only needed the truth in the order they could no longer interrupt. "That order was filed 7 years before I met him," I said. "A woman named Vienna got it after Wesley would not leave her alone. The court described harassment, stalking, intimidation. It was not sealed. It is public." Wesley found his voice first. "Brittany, that was years ago," he said. "You do not understand what happened." I turned to him. "I understand enough to know you have used the same language on every woman who leaves you. That is why it is page 1. My mother was still staring at the document. "He said that was a misunderstanding," she whispered. "Of course he did," I said. "That is what men like Wesley call it when somebody keeps records." I turned the page. The next section is my notebook. I started it because he kept telling me I imagined things he had said. I wrote down dates, times, and what happened after he checked my phone, tracked my location, cut me off from Pam, and told me I was unstable whenever I objected. My father looked at me then. really looked at me. Why did you never tell us? The question hurt more than I expected. I did, I said. You called it a phase. No one moved. I opened the next divider. These are messages Wesley sent to his mother and sister while we were married. He called me paranoid. He said I needed to be cared for, not given more freedom. He was building the story you have repeated about me for 5 years. He wanted people ready to distrust me before I ever had the words to explain what he was doing. Wesley stepped closer. Those were private family conversations. Yes, I said. That is where you did your best work. In private, I lifted my phone from the folder pocket. And this is the voicemail you left the week I filed for divorce. You told me I would never be at peace. You told me I would never have a marriage that lasted. You told me you would make sure of it, but you would be careful not to do anything I could call the police about. My mother's hand shook around the microphone. You played that for us? She asked. No, I said. I saved it for the day you made me need to. Then I turned to the final section. And these are your quarterly statements. 3 years. I checked every fee against the disclosed rates, every charge against the program description, every transaction against the account history. The returns are real. That is why you trusted him. But the fees are not. Wesley's face changed. It was slight, but I saw it. The same small calculation I had watched through our marriage whenever he realized a lie had reached its expiration date. Do not listen to her, he said to my father. She works in financial services, not compliance. She is interpreting documents she does not understand because she wants to hurt me. For 5 years, that sentence would have worked. I slid my summary across the table. $35,000, I said. That is the amount you took in undisclosed or inflated fees over 3 years. Not a mistake, not market losses. Fees you created because you knew Mom watched the return on page 1 and never read page 2. My father picked up the summary. He read the first paragraph, then the second. Danette, he said, and his voice was so low I almost did not hear it. Tell me she is lying. My mother sat down hard. Wesley reached for the folder. I closed it before his hand got there. Do not touch it, I said. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen in years. Not contempt, not certainty. Panic. I sent copies to your firm's compliance office on Thursday, I said. They have the statements, the fee analysis, the court order, and your voicemail. Monday morning, they can decide whether you still get to call yourself trusted. The microphone gave a small burst of feedback in my mother's hand. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. I looked at Wesley one last time. You told me I would never be at peace. I have been at peace for 4 years. You have spent the 5th trying to take it back through my parents. You do not get to say my husband's name. You do not get to use my family. And you do not get one more private room where I have to defend what happened to me. I closed the folder and picked it up. My mother could not look at me. My father was still holding the summary, reading the same lines, as if the numbers might change if he stared long enough. Wesley had stepped back from the table. The champagne glass was still in his hand, but he had forgotten to drink from it. I said, You can call me Brittany. You can call me your daughter. You can call me when you are ready to say what happened without making it about what it cost you. But you do not get to choose which man I am married to. You do not get to choose anything about my marriage again." Then I turned to Brielle. "I'm sorry," I said. "You deserved a wedding that was only about you. I love you. I will call tomorrow." Brielle was crying. She nodded once. I walked back to my table. Royce was already standing. He did not ask whether I was all right. He took my hand and lifted my bag from my shoulder, as though the folder had finally become something I did not have to carry by myself. We walked through the room together. The guests moved aside without being asked. Outside, the July air was warm and wet, and for several minutes neither of us spoke. The noise from the reception stayed behind the barn doors. At the car, Royce opened the passenger door for me. Before I got in, he touched my face and said, "I am proud of you." That was all. It was enough. The aftermath took 3 months, but it did not need 3 months to tell me who Wesley was. The wedding had already done that. His firm opened the package on Monday morning. By that afternoon, Wesley had been placed on administrative leave while its compliance department reviewed the accounts and fee disclosures. The firm contacted my parents, then their attorney. Within weeks, the matter had moved beyond a family fight and into formal complaints, restitution discussions, and regulatory review. The exact sequence belonged to lawyers and investigators after that. I did not need every update. I only needed to know he no longer had access to my parents' money or to mine. My parents recovered the money that had been taken through the fee structure. Wesley was terminated, a protective order I requested after the wedding was granted, covering me and Royce. He could not contact us. He could not contact my parents through us. The man who had spent 5 years trying to keep himself in every room of my life was finally outside the door. My father called 3 weeks after the wedding. He cried for 10 minutes before he could speak. "I have been a coward, Britt," he said. "Your mother and I have been cowards for a long time. I do not know how to make this right." I told him I did not know either. I told him I was not going to erase 5 years, because he had finally seen the man he had defended. I told him any relationship we built would have to be new, slow, and built on the understanding that the old one was over. I told him I would not speak to my mother yet, and that he would have to respect that boundary even when it made him uncomfortable. He said he understood. My mother called once a week later. I watched her name light up on my phone and let it stop. She did not leave a message. She has not called again. I do not know what she would say. I am not ready to hear it. There were other consequences, but I stopped collecting them like proof. I heard through my father that Wesley had tried to explain the fees as a misunderstanding. I heard that he had asked whether my parents would speak on his behalf. They did not. That mattered to me more than any dramatic punishment could have. For the first time, they had been asked to choose between the version of Wesley that made them feel wise and the evidence in front of them. They did not choose him. That was not forgiveness. It was the smallest possible beginning of accountability. I did not confuse the two. My father's apology did not give him access to me. My mother's silence did not become an excuse for me to soothe her. The work, if they wanted a relationship with me, would have to happen without my supervision. I had spent too many years managing other people's comfort while they ignored my safety. I was done being the person who made their denial easier to live with. Royce and I are okay. The night of the wedding, he drove us home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the center console between us. He did not ask for details in the car. He did not tell me what I should feel about my mother or father. He let the silence be mine. A week later, I gave him the folder. Until then, I had not let him read it. That was not because I did not trust him. It was because I had spent so long protecting pieces of myself from being turned into arguments that I needed to decide when and how they became someone else's knowledge. Royce read it over 2 evenings. He did not interrupt. He did not come out of the office every 10 minutes to tell me Wesley was awful or to ask why I had not left sooner. When he finished, he closed the folder and sat with it on his lap for a long time. Then he said, "Britt, you are the bravest person I have ever met. And I am sorry anybody made you think you had to keep this alone." I cried that night. Not because the folder had become less terrible and not because it repaired what my family had done. I cried because he had given me something Wesley spent years taking away. The right to have my own account of my life believed without being cross-examined. My mother had called Royce a Plan B. She had measured him by the money he did not make and the future she thought he could not provide. She had been wrong about Wesley, wrong about Royce, and wrong about the daughter she thought she could frighten back into obedience. I am 30 years old. I live in a small house in Charlotte with a high school history teacher who makes chicken on Valentine's Day and knows when not to ask questions. I have a job I am good at. I have Pam back. I have a husband who calls me brave. And I have the folder. It is in a fireproof box in my home office now. There are copies in 2 other places. I hope I never have to open it again. But I no longer keep it because I am afraid no one will believe me. I keep it because it reminds me that I believed myself first. Wesley thought I was still the 21-year-old he met in a bar, the woman he could correct, isolate, and persuade into doubting what she knew. He thought the years after I left him had been years of quiet defeat. He thought my marriage to Royce was a wound he could press through my mother until I came apart. He was wrong. I did not fold. I documented. I waited. And when they forced the moment, I set the truth on a table where no one could turn away from it. That was not revenge. That was the first honest thing anyone in my family had been made to see. Sometimes I open the fireproof box just to look at the folder's cover. Not the documents inside, just the cover worn at the corners from the weeks I carried it between my desk drawer, my car, and the wedding reception. It reminds me that evidence is not only for courtrooms or compliance departments. Sometimes it is a way of refusing the version of you other people find convenient. For years, Wesley had made me think keeping records meant I was paranoid. My mother had made me think boundaries meant I was ungrateful. My father had made silence look normal. The folder did not change the past. It did something more useful. It made the past impossible for them to deny in the future.